Breath of the Wild might have been 2017's hypest child, but it hasn't been Game of the Year without its fair share of criticisms. With a drastic shakeup to the Zelda formula, Breath of the Wild takes the series in a new direction, focusing on different priorities than the series is used to, and appearing to have turned more into one of those open-world sandbox RPGs that are all over the place today. Did the Switch's launch title and the Wii U's farewell game become an overrated mess blinded by hype? Or is it really as amazing as the awards of 2017 seem to think it is? Let's take a highly unqualified look into the recent Citizen Kane of gaming and try to figure it out. Starting with the narrative of the game, Breath of the Wild has a pretty non-interactive story. A long time ago, an evil was stopped by ancient weapons called divine beasts. Years later, Calamity Ganon shows up to Hyrule and starts terrorizing the land. Princess Zelda and her champions go to pilot the divine beasts to defeat Calamity Ganon and save the day. However, her bodyguard is defeated in battle and all the divine beast pilots are killed. 100 years later, Zelda's bodyguard is resurrected. Apparently, Princess Zelda has been keeping Calamity Ganon sealed up inside Hyrule Castle, and it's up to Link, her revived bodyguard, to stop Calamity Ganon and save Hyrule. Almost all of the story happens before the game starts. The story that happens after the game begins is all optional content, except for killing Ganon. So there are some other plots going on, but they all follow a similar path of one divine beast or another causing a bunch of havoc near a city, and a citizen is eager to stop it with the help of Link. And that's how the divine beast stories usually go. Link shows up, meets a representative of that area's race, Link completes a side quest, then he and the representative team up and stop the divine beast long enough for Link to enter it. The story that doesn't involve the divine beasts is a collection of flashbacks following Princess Zelda, revolving mainly around her dealing with the pressure of being the only one in charge of stopping Calamity Ganon. There isn't a lot of player interaction with the story, since almost all of it happens before the game even starts, and the little that does happen in the game feels underwhelming. The Zelda story reminded me a lot of Skyward Sword's story, with Zelda having the more interesting journey and Link just blandly chasing after her. I also found it weird that Link has a name in this game. It seems the only reason you can't name your character is because the name Link is said by a voice actor less than 5 times. It easily could have been replaced by hero or any other general term, but instead it's Link. What's even weirder is that Link canonically has a personality in this game. In one Zelda flashback, Zelda quotes Link, which means those are things 100 years ago Link said and believes. I just don't see why Link didn't have dialogue, since it seems like the designers had a specific idea of what they wanted Link's personality to be. But since Link never talks, and how he's never the focus of any cutscene, I don't see why he just couldn't be named whatever the player wanted to name him anyway. That's probably the most nitpicky thing I have to say about Breath of the Wild, but naming your character and having multiple save slots have been around since the first Zelda title, and they're just not in this game. Anyway, Breath of the Wild seems more interested in the player creating their own stories throughout playing the game than its written narrative. One of the most iconic things about Zelda, for me, are the items. Unlike previous Zelda titles, Breath of the Wild gives you all of your puzzle-solving items at the start of the game. These items tackle a wide range of puzzles throughout the game, which is good, since they're the only ones you'll be getting. The number of items is smaller than any other Zelda game, but they cover more areas in general. There's no Lens of Truth or Hookshot, but the Stasis Rune has a wider range of utility than either of those two. This seems to be the idea behind the items in Breath of the Wild, having a small selection of tools that lead to multiple ways of solving multiple problems, as opposed to the classic 3D Zelda way of having a large selection of niche tools for specific solutions. A positive to this approach is that the creative ways of solving puzzles or traversing areas is encouraged. Having fun and being creative is a big part of the gameplay in Breath of the Wild. The negative to this, though, is that creativity isn't required, it's just encouraged. And how that's a negative is that while being creative can lead to the puzzles being more fun, a non-creative method can be repeated over and over again throughout the entire game, which can make the puzzles boring since they can be solved by easily repeatable strategies. And this constant usage can make the items wear out their welcome. The Magnesis Rune is used a lot in solving very similar Korok Seed puzzles. Eventually, those puzzles get boring since you know exactly what item to use to solve them. It's an unfortunate side effect of having a massive world and a small selection of items available to use it in. But, since it isn't mandatory to solve every puzzle all over the world map on an average playthrough, the item usage for puzzle solving and exploring doesn't get worn out. Beyond the Sheikah Slate items, there are also rewards for completing each divine beast. These rewards aren't intended to be used for puzzle solving and can't be used in shrines. 3 of them focus heavily on combat or damage, while one being a damage-dealing lightning AoE, another being an auto-block parry, and the third one being a restoration of all the player's hearts and then some. The 4th, and in my opinion best reward, is Rivali's Gale, which allows the player to soar way up in the air right from the ground. This can be used to get to higher areas quickly, or just flat out skip encounters or overworld puzzles that may be hampering the player's progress. Since these items are rewards for completing optional content, they aren't required in any dungeon and thus only make the game easier. All in all though, the items are doing more with less, and they encourage creativity, and that is definitely a positive for the game. Moving on to the big part of the game, the overworld of Hyrule is the main draw of Breath of the Wild. It's this massive landscape cluttered with things to explore and sights to see. While there are some shortcuts taken to make Hyrule more of an island than a never-ending continent, the map is still impressively massive. The place is big, you get it, I know. What is more impressive than the size of Hyrule is the usage of space. I went all over Hyrule and each section of each area is memorable. This is accomplished by having each sub-area of Hyrule have different color schemes and different foliage. The forests and the jungles may have green trees, but the trees look different. The greens are different. The way the floor is packed together or pushed apart is different. So many small differences add up to make not realistic, but unquestionably different biomes. So different areas look different, but how does space manipulation come in? If you want to compare Breath of the Wild to another Zelda title, let's look at Wind Waker. The Wind Waker's overworld is a vast ocean with islands of content sprinkled throughout it. And Breath of the Wild's overworld is not really that different. With open fields, empty forests, and long stretches of snow being the ocean, and the stuff in between that are the islands of content. You have something like the Rizalfos encampment, the ruins with patrolling enemies and treasure chests, mini-games, and so on. Nuggets of things to do are spread out across the world, and they usually aren't clustered all together. There are calm, open areas where the player can breathe and relax, and then there are areas filled with lightning-firing monsters and massive explosions. This setup creates a more dynamic world. Looking at Ocarina of Time's overworld, it's much more empty with all the exciting things being packed away in areas just surrounding the dungeons. Breath of the Wild uses a different approach, and that approach works out pretty well. Though there is a lot of reused content in Breath of the Wild, the biggest offenders are probably the Bokoblin bases. But those are all non-shrine and side quest related material, so it's really not that big of a deal. With so many shrines and Korok seeds everywhere, there's always a goal to get to or an area to explore just to get into a shrine. And sometimes a shrine is just a treasure chest since the real challenge is getting up to it anyway. The big thing is traveling. The traversal of the overworld is a big part in how well a player can actually experience it. Horseback riding, gliding through the air, and shield surfing, these are all fast and fun ways of moving throughout the large areas of Hyrule. Running and climbing, however, I feel like are on the weaker end. Focusing on running first, the game can feel really dull if you end up in an area without your horse, and there are no towers near the direction you're trying to get to. Running on its own can get boring. The map is so big, it's a double-edged sword. While exploring, the size is amazing. While not exploring and just traversing, specifically on foot, it's a chore. This is made even worse by the stamina bar. The stamina bar works really well when giving Link the ability to run or climb or swim forever would just be less fun. Especially in smaller areas like the Divine Beasts or Shrines, stamina management is great. But being stuck managing stamina in a large open area with no enemies or anything to really interact with hurts pretty bad. Climbing takes this to a whole different level. Climbing a small mountain with dips and ledges, which are the player's goal, make managing the climb intense and stressful. Barely making it to an area with the stamina bar glowing red gives off a feeling of great relief. However, the stamina refilling items and even making the stamina bar bigger, and even the fact that you do a lot of climbing in Breath of the Wild, make each climb lose a little bit more of that intensity. That causes climbing to get boring. Without any tension, climbing just becomes slow, vertical movement. There aren't a lot of flat surfaces to climb in Breath of the Wild though. Instead, the in-game climbing walls are full of things to land on or circumvent. When the mountains had things to engage the player with while climbing, the climb got better. This is just another problem with the size and scope of the game though. There are so many mountains to climb that it's only natural the enjoyment would deteriorate with each mountain. While climbing has the same negatives due to size, it also has the same positive, and that the players aren't expected to require to climb every mountain, so they'd probably stop doing massive mountain climbs after it got boring. Even though in the end I did get bored with climbing, it took a long time since there's variation and constant engagement while climbing, for the most part. The Divine Beasts can be argued as the main dungeons in Breath of the Wild. Looking at them with that lens doesn't put them in a very good light. Let's start with the overall dungeon description. Getting to a Divine Beast involves doing an area-specific quest chain that has Link along with a native of the area teaming up and disabling the Divine Beast for a period of time, just long enough to get Link inside. All 4 Divine Beasts start this way. They all start with a cutscene showing how to get the map of the beast and a voiceover from a fallen champion telling Link to get the map. Now the map is important since it basically acts as the controller of the Divine Beast you're inside, but hearing it 4 times is very tiring. All of the Divine Beasts have some part that is able to be rotated, and rotating that part around is required for solving each beast. While the puzzles aren't hard, they aren't that bad either, but the Divine Beasts when compared to Zelda dungeons are too short, too easy, and too forgettable. Most of those problems are understandable though. Looking at Breath of the Wild as a portable game, since it was released for the Nintendo Switch, I can see why the dungeons are short. They can be completed in a smaller playtime, which is the more ideal design choice since the Switch can be played as a portable device. The difficulty problem with the dungeons is due to the design choice of having all the Divine Beasts be optional. Because any of the Divine Beasts could be your first, they all hover around the starter dungeon difficulty. Nothing really gets complex, and no concepts are ever really built upon. The dungeons only get easier as you tackle them since you unlock more rewards and get more familiar with the runes from the Sheikah Slate as the game progresses, but the Divine Beasts stay at the same starter level. I understand these problems and that they have their trade-offs. The length for portability and the standard difficulty curve for non-linearity. The forgettable nature of the dungeons I don't have a good defense for. All 4 dungeons start and end the exact same way. They all look the same with the same music, the same enemies, and they have the same rotation mechanic. The bosses even look the same. Thematically, I guess it could make sense. They're all ancient machines, so they look the same, and the bosses are all bits of Ganon, which is why they look the same, but whatever. This is a video game, you know? These dungeons should have been more video gamed up to look and feel more different from one another. The quests leading up to each Divine Beast is an example of this done better. While the arc is the same, go to a city, meet a friend, complete a task, team up with friend to stop the Divine Beast, they all have different characters, different tasks, and use different styles of teamwork that end up making them more memorable. All in all, the Divine Beasts aren't the worst, but I think they certainly could have been a lot better. So that was looking at the Divine Beasts as though they were the dungeons of Breath of the Wild. Next we got the shrines. Shrines can also be argued as the dungeons of this Zelda game. Shrines can vary in difficulty as well as repetition. Some shrines might just be repeats while others might be exotic and very memorable. There are too many shrines doing too many different things for me to cover all of them, so I'm just going to give a short overview of them instead. Shrines give the reward of either a quarter of a stamina bar or a quarter heart piece. Since there are so many shrines, they're always worth the reward to build up to a full heart or stamina bar. There's now a guaranteed incentive to get to the shrine, which is great. Beyond that incentive, shrines hold all the puzzles and challenges in Breath of the Wild, so there is now an additional incentive of getting to a shrine which may lead to doing cool things. I think they easily could have made shrines a thing players don't care about. Looking at Korok seeds, those fell off pretty quickly. I couldn't care about the Korok seeds anymore, and unless the puzzles to get them looked fun, I stopped bothering. The reward for collecting Korok seeds stopped being incentivizing to me, and the puzzles to get them stopped being enjoyable. Shrines, however, are almost always worth doing. With so many shrines in the game, I think it's fair to say that they are hit and miss when it comes to quality. Some are repeats, but others are really, really good. I think a good set of shrines are the ones located in the Hebra section of the map. Most, if not all of them, revolve around wind puzzles, and I thought that location having a theme was really cool. There are too many shrines to expect all or even most of them to be good. The idea behind shrines was also being that players aren't meant to find and complete all of them in one playthrough. While I would have preferred a smaller number of shrines with a higher amount of quality within them as opposed to what we got, for the philosophy of Breath of the Wild, what they did makes sense. The shrines are short because the game needs to be playable while portable. There are a lot of shrines because the game is meant to give each player as a unique of an experience as they can give them. If you and I both completed 60 shrines on our individual playthroughs of Breath of the Wild, it is extremely unlikely we did the same 60 shrines. So the next playthrough of Breath of the Wild I would probably come across a bunch of different shrines I didn't do the first time around. Keeping that in mind, it's easy to want more from the shrines, but I think they do their job okay. If I can make a proposal for getting more challenging shrines in the future, I think having a difficulty rating being noted on each shrine before entering would be a reasonable solution. So players who are not prepared or not interested in a challenging shrine can avoid it, and players who are not interested in an easy shrine can skip over those. It keeps everything else the same, but at least it wouldn't have an inexperienced player running into a challenge they weren't ready for, or players not being let down by having an easy shrine when expecting something greater. All of that said, the DLC shrines are my favorite, and I think if more shrines like those were around in the base game, it would be an overall better experience. So I kind of forgot to talk about combat. I think combat in Breath of the Wild, above all other Zelda titles, is the least important aspect of the game. It's true the combat is different from what it has been in previous titles, and it's true that a lot of the in-game rewards focus on combat. But combat is not the main draw of the game to me. Basic combat is stale. There aren't a lot of different ways to really hit enemies, though there are a lot of different ways to damage them. What I mean is your attacking animations and just regular weapon attacks don't really change, but you can do a lot of creative things to kill enemies. And because of Link's new mobile moveset, enemy placement is allowed to be a lot more varied and interesting than just being on the floor in an empty room. Weapons kind of affect combat. I mean, they obviously affect combat, but what I mean is I don't care for the new additions to weapon design in Breath of the Wild. I don't care about the durability aspect of the game or how much damage a weapon does. So weapons can break now, and really that just means for the early game you will be using a cluster truck of terrible weapons while stockpiling good ones to use later. Eventually, by mid-game you'll have a lot of useful weapons, and they won't be breaking faster than you can collect those of equal or greater quality. In the end, yeah, weapons break. I didn't find it to be that big of a deal. Anyway, what did I mean by rewards being related to combat? I meant that the rewards from treasure chests or shrines are usually armor or weapons. Even food and the buffs gained from eating have combat practicality. While sure there is the odd temperature affecting attribute here and there, it's mostly the stats from the items that matter. How much damage does this thing deal? How much damage does this thing block? How many hearts does this restore? And so on and so on. The different ways you can play around in combat is fun though. Parrying and dodging or throwing your weapon or doing cool stuff like that was fun. I just feel like the input of item stats just wasn't necessary. That all being said, engaging with the environment to defeat enemies or performing trick shots or using Sheikah runes to disrupt enemy attack patterns is really fun and really awesome. This is where the creativity allowed by the more broad design of Breath of the Wild gets to shine. While standard hack and slash combat I feel is less dynamic and enjoyable than any other Zelda title, the additional aspects of the Breath of the Wild toolkit, from Link's new mobility to the runes, make a more fluid and entertaining experience all around. I think that I covered everything about Breath of the Wild worth talking about, except for the one big thing. I've written probably 5 scripts about this game and jumped around a lot on what type of video I'd want to make about it. When I played Breath of the Wild almost a year ago, I didn't like it. Well, at least whenever I talked about it, it seemed I didn't like it. But when making my top 10 games of 2017 video, I was judging them by games I couldn't stop playing. And with the week or two I spent playing Breath of the Wild, I couldn't put it down. So upon thinking about that, I decided to replay it in December and felt almost the exact same way as before, but was just more conscious about it. I knew I was having fun while playing the game, but when it came to me talking about it, I only said negative things. The thing is, Breath of the Wild isn't a 3D Zelda game. At least it's not designed like a classic 3D Zelda game. And it has taken me a long time to admit that, and it's okay that it isn't a classic 3D Zelda game. Breath of the Wild is a different genre than something like Twilight Princess, much how A Link Between Worlds is a different genre than something like Majora's Mask. Putting aside the baggage that comes with being a Zelda title, Breath of the Wild does a lot of fun and cool and interesting things, and it plays around with some really good ideas. It's hard to compare it to the rest of the series because Breath of the Wild has more in common with a Ubisoft game than a Zelda one. The platforming up a tower to get a sweeping camera shot that then unlocks the tower as a fast travel location as the surrounding area gets revealed on your map. I mean, yeah, that's like the Ubisoft special. Or foraging around an overworld, crafting together supplies and shooting things with a bow. That's becoming so popular, I think God of War is now doing it. I mean, the game just isn't in the old genre anymore, so comparing it to the older genre games just doesn't make sense. On its own, with no baggage, no comparisons, the game is a good time. It's a ton of fun with some really good implemented quirks from the Zelda series. I wish it had a better narrative, and I wish it had better dungeons, but Breath of the Wild really nailed down all the things it set out to do, not the things that I wish it did. Portability-wise, the game is easy to get through in small chunks, and the overworld is this massive place, and exploring it is amazing. I can't help being a little disappointed that I didn't get a classic 3D Zelda style game in 2017, but Breath of the Wild was a great replacement, one I appreciate a lot more now, and probably still will, in the years ahead.